He didn't offer money, he didn't offer marriage, and he didn't offer empty promises. He offered a home in exchange for something no man had ever asked of her, a second chance to prove he could be different from what everyone said. And Beatrice, with 2 children in her arms and night falling over the high plains, had to decide if she believed in redemption or if she would keep wandering until the darkness swallowed them whole. Can you imagine being so desperate that you agree to enter the home of a man you've never seen, about whom you've only heard terrible stories, because the alternative is sleeping in the open with your starving children? This story happened in March 1934. In the desolate expanses of West Texas, in a region where ranches were so far apart that the isolation could be a blessing or a curse. If you are enjoying this story, leave a comment below telling me where you are watching from. Write your city and state. I read all the comments, and I am very happy to know that these stories are reaching so many different places. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe now and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next stories of resilience and emotion I have to tell. Beatrice Miller was 28 years old when she discovered that widowhood for a poor woman isn't mourning, it's eviction. She was kneeling by the edge of the creek, scrubbing her dead husband's last shirt, when the foreman of the Santa Rita ranch appeared on a dun horse and said she had until sundown to leave the shack. The boss already had another hand arriving from Abilene with his family. They needed the house. The cold water ran through her fingers, carrying lye soapsuds downstream. Beatrice didn't look up. She asked how much time she had. The foreman repeated it louder, as if she were deaf or stupid, until sundown. She dipped the shirt again, applied more soap, and scrubbed hard. Her hands were red, cracked by the March chill and the work. She had buried Julian only 10 days ago. 10 days, and all that was left of him was that shirt smelling of earth and sweat, and 2 children who still asked when their daddy was coming back. The foreman didn't dismount. He sat there, hat on his head, looking at her with that expression Beatrice knew well, pity mixed with impatience. He asked if she understood. Beatrice nodded without stopping her scrubbing. She understood. She always understood. Poor women always understand bad things too quickly. When the foreman left, Beatrice stayed there longer than she needed to. The shirt was already clean, but she kept scrubbing. She needed her hands to do something, or the rest of her body would collapse right there. The sun was high, fierce, typical of late winter in the plains. Cicadas sang in that shrill pitch that seemed to drill into the ears and echo inside the head. The creek ran slow, brown with silt, carrying dry leaves and twigs. Beatrice looked at the water and thought how easy it would be to just step in, lie down, and let the current take her. But then she heard Ralph shouting from up the bank, calling for her, and the thought died before it could become a temptation. She wrung out the shirt with force, heard the water drip, and hung it on a mesquite branch to dry. She climbed the bank holding onto exposed roots, her calico skirt wet and clinging to her legs. Ralph was at the door of the shack, barefoot, holding his sister. The boy was 6 years old, but already knew how to carry responsibility. Claire was 3 and still cried every night asking for her father. Beatrice stopped in front of them, wiped her hands on her skirt. She said they were going on a trip. Ralph frowned and asked where. She answered, "To town." The boy wanted to know why. Beatrice crouched in front of him, held his small face between her hands. "Because we are, my son. Let's pack our things now." There weren't many things to pack. Julian Miller had been a cattle hand, not an owner of anything. They lived in a 2-room shack at the back of the ranch headquarters. The furniture belonged to the ranch. The pots belonged to the ranch. Even the chickens in the yard belonged to the ranch. What was theirs fit into a cloth bundle, 3 changes of clothes, a blanket, the Bible Beatrice inherited from her mother, the little wooden horse Julian had whittled for Ralph, and the rag doll Beatrice had sewn for Claire. She tied the bundle, balanced it on her head, picked Claire up in her arms, held Ralph's hand. She left the shack without looking back. If she looked, she would crumble. She had lived there for 8 years. She had arrived as a 19-year-old bride, had birthed her 2 children there, had washed her husband's blood when he came back hurt from working with wild steers, had buried 3 babies who didn't make it between Ralph and Claire. That shack was the only home she knew as a grown woman, but now it was no more. The walk to the town of Stanton Creek took 4 hours on foot. Beatrice knew it because she had gone a few times with Julian to get supplies. The red dirt road snaked through the scrubland, passed through 3 cattle gates, crossed a rocky wash, and climbed a small ridge. At first, Ralph walked beside her, excited by the adventure, but when the sun began to truly heat up, the boy tired. His short legs couldn't keep up with her pace. Claire grew heavier in her arms. Beatrice felt the sweat running down her back, the bundle growing heavier on her head. They stopped in the shade of a cottonwood tree. Beatrice divided the last piece of dried beef she had saved, gave water from the canteen to the children. Ralph asked if they were going to live with Grandma. Beatrice felt her chest tighten. She said, "No, my son." The boy wanted to know why. Because Grandma already died, remember? Ralph made a face like he had forgotten and now remembered. And Grandpa? Beatrice explained that Grandpa had died too. And Aunt Sarah? Beatrice sighed. Aunt Sarah lived too far away in Oklahoma, and they didn't have the money to get there. Ralph went quiet, chewing the beef. Then he asked, with that thin child's voice that pierces the chest, if they were going to live on the street. Beatrice pulled him close, pressed him against her body. She said no, that she would find a way, that Mama always finds a way. But when she spoke, her voice trembled, and Ralph noticed. Children always notice. They arrived in town when the sun was already dipping low. Stanton Creek was a small settlement, maybe 200 people, with a stone church in the central square, some 20 wooden houses around it, 3 stores, and a notary that operated out of a lawyer's house. Beatrice went straight to Mary's house, an acquaintance who sold pies at the market. She knocked on the door. Mary opened it, saw her there with the children and the bundle, and before Beatrice could even speak, said she couldn't help. The house was small. Her husband wouldn't like it. She barely had enough to eat herself. Beatrice tried the preacher's house. Preacher Lawrence was an old man, white-haired, who had baptized her 2 children. He answered the door, listened to her situation, scratched his beard. He said the church didn't have space to house anyone, but she could sleep in the back shed for 1 night only. Beatrice thanked him. The shed smelled of mold and mice. There were old boxes stacked up, a broken bench, cobwebs in the corners. Beatrice spread the blanket on the dirt floor, laid the children down. Ralph and Claire fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the walk. Beatrice sat leaning against the wall, watching them in the dark. The moonlight entered through a crack in the roof, illuminating their dusty little faces. Claire snored softly. Ralph had his arm over his sister, protecting her even in sleep. Beatrice felt something rise in her throat, something hot and bitter. Tears began to fall, silent, thick. She covered her mouth with her hand, so as not to make noise. She cried until there was nothing left inside. When she stopped, she was empty, hollow, and it was in that emptiness that the anger appeared. Anger at Julian for dying, anger at the boss for kicking her out, anger at God for doing things this way, anger at herself for having nowhere to go, for having no family, no money, having nothing but 2 children and a bundle. She slept little, woke up before the sun rose, her body aching and head heavy. The children were still sleeping. Beatrice went out slowly, went to the church well, washed her face in the cold water. The sky was brightening, that pale dawn blue. Roosters crowed in the distance. The air smelled of wood smoke. When she returned to the shed, Preacher Lawrence was waiting at the door. He said he needed her to leave soon. There was a 6 o'clock service, and there couldn't be strangers hanging around. Beatrice nodded. She woke the children, rolled up the blanket, tied the bundle. They left. The town was waking up. Some women were sweeping the boardwalks. A man opened the door of the general store. Beatrice walked through the square, not knowing where to go. She tried 2 more acquaintances' houses. One said she couldn't. The other didn't even open the door properly. Beatrice sat on the bench in the square, the children beside her. Ralph asked if he could play. She let him. The two went to the horse trough, watching the water ripple. That was when Miss Hattie appeared. Miss Hattie was the town midwife, a black woman of about 60, white hair tied in a bun, strong hands that had caught hundreds of babies. She knew Beatrice from when Claire was born. It had been her who delivered the girl, cut the cord, gave her the first bath. Miss Hattie sat on the bench next to Beatrice without asking permission. She stayed there in silence, watching the children at the trough. After a while she asked what had happened. Beatrice told her. Julian's death, the eviction, the town's rejection. Miss Hattie listened to everything, nodding slowly. When Beatrice finished, the midwife sighed deeply, said the world was hard on a woman alone. Beatrice nodded. Miss Hattie stayed quiet a while longer. Then she said something Beatrice didn't expect. She said she knew someone who might help. Beatrice raised her eyes, a spark of hope lighting up. Who? Miss Hattie hesitated, rubbed her face like someone unsure if she should speak. Then she said the name, Theodore Blackwood. Beatrice knew the name. Everyone in the region knew it. Theodore Blackwood was the widowed rancher who lived alone at the Three Creeks Ranch, 5 leagues away. The stories about him ran through the towns like fire in dry grass. They said he had been cruel to his wife, Eudora. They said he drank too much, yelled, broke things, that she had lived years of silent suffering. They said when Eudora died of fever 3 years ago, he had drunk for 3 days straight and then never touched a drop again. They said he had lived alone since then, working like a condemned man, speaking to almost no one, carrying his guilt like a cross. Beatrice looked at Miss Hattie as if she had gone mad. The midwife raised a hand, asking for patience, said she knew what Beatrice was thinking, that she herself had thought the same thing, but that Theodore wasn't that man anymore, that he had changed, that she had seen the change with her own eyes because she had treated him when he fell off a horse last year, and the man she found wasn't the monster from the stories. Beatrice asked why Theodore would help her. Miss Hattie answered that she didn't know if he would, but that it was worth a try. Beatrice asked what she should do. Miss Hattie explained that Theodore came to town every Tuesday afternoon to get supplies at the general store. Today was Tuesday. If Beatrice waited there, maybe she could talk to him. Beatrice stayed on that bench in the square all day with the children. People passed, looked out of the corner of their eyes, whispered. She didn't care. She divided the last piece of bread she had saved between Ralph and Claire, gave them water from the pump. The sun rose, heated up, began to descend. In the middle of the afternoon, a wagon came into town. But it wasn't Theodore. It was an elderly couple. Beatrice kept waiting. The afternoon dragged on. The shadows grew longer. Ralph complained he was hungry again. Claire whimpered. Beatrice hummed softly to calm the girl, but her own voice came out weak, without strength. The sun was already touching the horizon when he appeared. Theodore Blackwood arrived riding a tall black horse with a long mane. He was a big man, broad shoulders, huge hands holding the reins. He must have been about 40-something. He had stubble on his face, a worn leather hat, simple work clothes. He dismounted in front of the general store, tied the horse, went in. Beatrice got up from the bench. Her heart was beating too fast. Her mouth was dry. She picked Claire up, held Ralph's hand, crossed the square. She stood at the door of the store, waiting. She could hear his voice inside, deep, asking for things from the shopkeeper. Lard, salt, kerosene, rope. When Theodore came out carrying some packages, he almost bumped into her. He stopped, looked at Beatrice, then at the children, then at the bundle on the ground. His eyes were dark, deep, tired. He asked if she needed something. His voice was rough, but not mean. Beatrice opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her tongue had turned to stone. She tried again, managed to say her name, Beatrice Miller, widow of Julian Miller, who was a hand at the Santa Rita Ranch. Theodore nodded slowly, like someone trying to remember if he knew him. She continued, said her husband had died, that she had been evicted, that she had nowhere to go. Theodore stood looking at her without saying anything. The silence lasted so long that Beatrice thought he was simply going to turn his back and walk away. But he didn't. He asked, carefully, what exactly she wanted from him. Beatrice felt the tears burning again, but didn't let them fall. She said she needed work, that she could cook, wash, sew, tend a garden, that she worked hard, that she didn't ask for much, just food and a corner for her and the children to stay until she got on her feet, that she would pay with work. Theodore looked at the packages in his own hands. Then he looked at the sky, which was turning orange with the sunset. Then he looked back at Beatrice, and he said something she never imagined hearing. He said he didn't need a maid, that he took care of his own house, his own clothes, his own food, but that he had a different proposal, if she wanted to hear it. Beatrice nodded, unable to speak. Theodore took a deep breath, started slowly, choosing his words. He said she had probably heard of him, of the stories, of what he had been. Beatrice confirmed with a nod. He continued, said the stories were true, that he had been a bad man, that he had made his wife suffer, that she had died without him being able to fix anything, that he lived with that every day. He paused, looked at his boots. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, almost a murmur. Said that 3 years ago he had quit drinking, that he had tried to be different, but that there was no one to see it. That he lived alone on that ranch that was too big, working until he dropped from exhaustion, and that it didn't matter how much he changed because there was no one to witness that he wasn't that man anymore. Theodore raised his eyes and looked straight at Beatrice, said he could offer a home for her and the children, house, food, safety. She wouldn't need to work as a maid. She would live as a resident, with dignity. But in exchange, he asked for only one thing, that she give him a second chance, that she see with her own eyes that he had changed, that she witness that he was no longer the monster from the stories, and that if, after a while, she thought he didn't deserve that chance, she could leave whenever she wanted, owing nothing. Beatrice stood mute. That made no sense at all. No man made a proposal like that. Men asked for labor, asked for marriage, asked for favors of the body. But asking to be seen as a good person, asking for a second chance like it was charity, it was madness. Theodore must have seen the confusion on her face, because he added faster now that she wouldn't need to be afraid, that she would have a separate room with a lock on the door, that he expected nothing beyond what he had said, no intimacy, no commitment, just the chance to prove he had changed. Claire began to whimper in Beatrice's arms. The girl was tired, hungry, sleepy. Ralph pulled his mother's skirt, whispered he wanted to go home. Beatrice looked at her children, then looked at the empty square, then looked at the sky getting dark fast. She looked back at Theodore, asked with a trembling voice why he was doing that. Why her? Why now? Theodore stayed silent for a long time. When he answered, the words came out slow, heavy. Said because she needed it and he could help. And because maybe by helping her, he could pay a little of the debt he owed the world, owed Eudora, owed God, owed himself. Beatrice felt something shift inside her chest. It wasn't trust yet, it was just less despair. And in that moment, less despair was already something. She asked when they would go. Theodore said now, if she wanted. There was still time to arrive before night closed in completely. Beatrice looked at the bundle on the ground, looked at the children, looked at that big man with calloused hands and the look of a beaten dog, and made the choice that would change everything. She said yes. Theodore helped Beatrice up onto the horse with Claire in her arms, then placed Ralph in front of him. The bundle was tied to the saddlebag. The path to Three Creeks Ranch was dark and silent, only the sound of the horse's hooves on the dirt and the song of the cicadas. Beatrice held Claire tightly, feeling the sway of the animal, the smell of sweat and leather. Ralph rode quietly, gripping the saddle horn, his little eyes wide trying to see in the darkness. Theodore didn't say anything the whole way. He just guided the horse with certainty, avoiding holes, following a trail he knew with his eyes closed. When they arrived, the moon was already high. The ranch headquarters was a large adobe house, colonial tile roof, a porch in front with wooden columns. It wasn't rich, but it was solid, well cared for. Theodore dismounted first, then helped Beatrice down. Her legs were trembling, both from fatigue and the fear that began to grow now that she was there, in the middle of nowhere, in the house of a man she didn't know. Theodore lit a kerosene lantern, the yellow light illuminating the living room. The floor was wood plank, clean. There was a large wooden table, some chairs, a sideboard with simple dishes. The walls were white, undecorated. A single man's house. Theodore showed the room that would be Beatrice and the children's. It was in the back, had a double bed, a trunk, a small window. He explained he had put clean sheets on that morning before leaving, said she could lock the door from the inside, showed the lock, a thick piece of wood that fit into iron hooks. Beatrice entered the room, taking the children. Theodore stood at the door, said he would leave food on the table in case she or the little ones got hungry during the night, that his room was on the other side of the house, that if she needed anything, just call. Then he said goodnight and left, closing the door behind him. Beatrice stood in the middle of the room, listening to his footsteps fade away, heard a door open and close in the distance, then silence. She went to the door, placed the bar lock, tested it twice to be sure. Only then could she breathe. She laid the children on the bed. Ralph and Claire fell asleep in seconds. Beatrice sat on the edge of the bed, looking at them, then at the locked door, then at the window. Her heart was still beating fast. Part of her didn't believe what she had done. She had entered a stranger's house, a man with a terrible reputation. What if this was all a lie? What if he was just waiting for her to let her guard down? She didn't sleep that night. She sat up, alert to any noise. But the house remained silent. No footsteps approached the door. No attempt to enter. Just the thick silence of the plains night, cut occasionally by the hoot of an owl or the distant howl of a coyote. When the sun began to rise, Beatrice finally leaned her head against the wall and dozed off. She woke up to the smell of coffee, jumped up startled. The children were still sleeping. She went to the door, pressed her ear against it, heard the noise of a pot running water, removed the bar slowly, opened the door just a crack. Theodore was in the kitchen with his back turned, stirring something on the wood stove. He wore the same clothes as the day before. His hair was wet, combed back. He must have bathed at the pump. When he heard the door, he turned his head, said good morning, asked if she had slept well. Beatrice lied and said yes. He nodded and said he had made coffee and cornbread, that she could help herself whenever she wanted. Then he went out the back door, put on his hat, and headed toward the corral. Beatrice stood there, processing. He hadn't tried to talk, hadn't asked questions, hadn't come close, just made coffee and went to work. She entered the kitchen slowly. The table was set, 3 plates, 3 mugs, 3 forks. He had set places for the children too. The cornbread was still hot, smelling good. There was butter in a crock, some molasses in a small dish, fresh milk in a clay pitcher. Beatrice sat, served a piece of bread, took a sip of coffee. It was good, very good. She didn't remember the last time she'd eaten warm bread. At Santa Rita, food was always leftovers from the boss's table. Here, Theodore had baked bread early in the morning. For her, for the children. Ralph woke up first, appeared in the kitchen rubbing his eyes. Saw the food and his eyes lit up. Beatrice served him, then woke Claire. The three ate in silence, ravenous. When they finished, Beatrice washed the dishes, not because Theodore had asked, but because she didn't know what else to do. She spent the day exploring the house. Theodore didn't appear. She heard him working outside, the sound of the axe chopping wood, hammer hitting fence, cattle lowing in the distance. In the late afternoon, he came in, went straight to his room, came back with clean clothes, asked if there was bread left. Beatrice said yes. He ate, standing up, fast, then went out again, came back at night, dirty with dirt and sweat, heated water, bathed in his room. When he came out, Beatrice had left food on the table, beans, rice, fried egg. She had cooked, using what she found in the pantry. Theodore sat, looked at the plate, then looked at her, asked if she had made it. Beatrice confirmed. He thanked her, ate slowly, in silence. When he finished, he washed his own plate, said good night, and went to his room. So passed the first days. Theodore woke up early, worked all day, came back tired, bathed, ate, went to sleep, spoke little, asked no questions, didn't get too close, kept a respectful distance. Beatrice watched everything, looked for signs of the man the stories described, looked for anger, impatience, violence, found none. Found only a tired man who worked too much and spoke too little. If you are liking this story, leave a like and share it with someone who needs to hear a message of hope today. A week after they arrived, Ralph knocked over a clay pitcher by accident. The pitcher shattered on the floor, shards everywhere, water spreading. The boy froze, his face pale with fear. Beatrice froze too. Theodore was sitting at the table mending a harness. He looked up, saw the broken pitcher, saw the terrified boy. Beatrice braced herself, expected the yell, the scolding, maybe even violence. Julian wasn't a violent man, but even he yelled when the kids broke things, and Theodore had a reputation for a short fuse. But Theodore just got up, went to the boy, crouched to his level, asked if Ralph was hurt. The boy shook his head. Theodore took a quick look at the little hands, confirmed there were no cuts, then began to pick up the shards with his own hands. Told Ralph not to worry, that there were plenty of pitchers in that house, that accidents happened. Asked the boy to get the floor rag while he finished gathering the pieces. Ralph obeyed, still trembling, helped dry the floor. When they finished, Theodore ruffled his hair lightly, an almost affectionate gesture, and went back to the harness. Like nothing had happened. Beatrice stood there, processing what she had seen. That wasn't normal. Men didn't react that way. Especially men with a history of violence. There must be something wrong. Some game, some mask. But the days kept passing and the mask didn't fall. Theodore began teaching Ralph how to tend the chickens, showed him how to throw the corn, how to gather the eggs without scaring the birds. The boy followed him around the yard, fascinated. Theodore spoke softly, had infinite patience. When Ralph did it wrong, he corrected him calmly, without irritation. With Claire, he was even more careful. The girl was afraid of him at first, hid behind her mother's skirt whenever he came close. Theodore noticed, stopped trying, just left things for her to find. A pretty flower on the edge of the well, a smooth, shiny stone on the doorstep, a little bird carved from wood, rough but made with care. Claire picked up the things, looked, kept them. Didn't speak, but didn't throw them away either. Beatrice watched everything, noted every gesture, every word, every silence, looked for cracks in the facade. But the more she watched, the more confused she became. Because either Theodore was the best actor she had ever seen, or the stories were wrong, or he really had changed. A month after they arrived, Beatrice woke in the middle of the night to a strange noise, a muffled shout, then silence, then another shout. It came from Theodore's room. She lay paralyzed in bed, heart racing. Was someone in the house? Robbers? A panther? But then she heard it again and understood. It wasn't a cry of pain. It was a nightmare. Theodore was having a nightmare. She lay listening. The shouts came in waves, jumbled words, pleas, weeping. Theodore was crying in his sleep. Beatrice recognized that kind of crying. She had seen it in soldiers coming back from the war when she was a child. Had seen it in her own father after her mother died. It was the cry of a man broken inside. The shout stopped. The house returned to silence. Beatrice lay awake, thinking. Theodore wasn't a monster. He was a haunted man. There was a difference. The next morning, she noticed the dark circles under his eyes, the redness. He didn't mention anything. Drank his coffee fast and left to work. But when he returned for lunch, Beatrice had made chicken and rice stew, her late husband's favorite meal. Theodore sat, tasted it, closed his eyes, said it was very good, that it had been years since he ate stew that good. His voice trembled a little when he spoke. Beatrice sat on the other side of the table. For the first time since she arrived, she ate with him. They didn't talk much, but it was different. It was less lonely. Weeks turned into months. June arrived with a chill, the cold nights of the plains winter. Theodore brought more blankets for Beatrice's room. Fixed the window that let the wind in. Put more wood near the stove. Beatrice started baking bread. Theodore ate the warm bread at breakfast and always commented that it was good. She started varying it, made biscuits, made sweet rolls, made coconut candy. Theodore ate everything and always thanked her. Ralph started calling him Mr. Theodore, then just Theodore. Then one day Beatrice would never forget, the boy slipped and called him Dad. Realized immediately, turned red, corrected to Theodore. But Theodore had heard. He said nothing, but Beatrice saw his eyes shine wet before he turned his face away. Claire finally lost her fear, started letting him pick her up, then started asking him to tell a story before bed. Theodore told stories of animals, of ghosts, of heroes. He had a way with words. The children listened, glued to him. Beatrice realized she had stopped locking the door at night. It was in August, 3 months after they arrived, that Loretta appeared. Beatrice was hanging clothes on the line when she saw the buggy coming up the road. An elegant woman, in a dark dress, hat with a veil, stepped down, helped by the driver. She was a lady of about 45, tall, thin, with a hard face. She looked at the house with an expression of someone smelling something rotten. Beatrice dropped the laundry basket and went to the porch. The woman walked up the steps without asking permission, stopped in front of Beatrice, looked her up and down, asked with a cutting voice who she was. Beatrice answered with her name. The woman narrowed her eyes, asked what Beatrice was doing there. Beatrice explained she lived there. The woman gave a short laugh, humorless, said she knew very well what Beatrice was doing there. That a single woman in a widower's house could only mean one thing. That it was shameful, that it was an insult to Eudora's memory. Beatrice felt her face heat up, was going to answer, but Theodore appeared coming from the corral. When he saw the woman, he stopped. His expression, which was always calm, became tense. He said the name. Loretta. Loretta turned to him. Her voice came out icy. Said she had returned from Austin because she had heard rumors. That she hadn't believed it when they told her, that she had come to see with her own eyes if it was true. And now she saw. Theodore had replaced her sister, had put another woman in the house where Eudora had suffered, had put strange children in the place of the children Eudora never managed to have because of the suffering he caused. Theodore took a deep breath, said it wasn't like that. That Beatrice wasn't a substitute for anyone, that she was a widow with children who needed help, that he was just offering a home. Loretta spat the words, said he wasn't fooling anyone, that men don't help women for free, that he must be taking advantage of her just like he took advantage of Eudora, that she wouldn't let it happen, that she would talk to the sheriff, the preacher, whoever was needed, that she would get that woman out of there, and that if she could, she would take his land too. Because a man who had done what he did to her sister deserved nothing, only deserved to pay. Beatrice saw the pain pass over Theodore's face. He didn't yell, didn't fight back, just lowered his head, said Loretta was right, that he didn't deserve forgiveness, that he would carry the guilt of what he did until he died, but that Beatrice and the children had nothing to do with it, to leave them alone. Loretta turned her back. Before going down the stairs, she turned and said one last thing, said she would find a way to end that situation, that he could wait, got into the buggy and left. Beatrice stood beside Theodore. He was pale, his hands shaking. She asked if everything was okay. Theodore shook his head, said no, that nothing was okay, that he had been an idiot to think he could start over, that the past wouldn't let him, that Loretta was right, that he was no good. Beatrice felt something move inside her, something that had been sleeping and now woke up. It was anger, anger at Loretta, anger at the town, anger at the world that wouldn't let anyone change. She told Theodore to look at her. He raised his eyes. Beatrice said with a firm voice that he wasn't the man of the past, that she had seen, that she had observed every gesture of his in the last 3 months, that if he were the monster from the stories, she would have left on the first day. But he wasn't. He was a good man who had done bad things and was trying to fix them. Theodore looked at her as if seeing her for the first time, asked with a hoarse voice if she really believed that. Beatrice nodded, and realized with surprise that she believed it. At some point in the last months, without realizing it, she had started to trust him. More than that, she had started to like him. But Loretta wasn't bluffing. A week later, Sheriff Miller appeared at the ranch. He was a serious man, with a thick mustache, who had known Theodore for years. He said he had received a complaint that Loretta had gone to the station saying Theodore was keeping a woman in an improper situation, that technically this could be considered cohabitation outside of wedlock, which caused moral scandal, that he, Sheriff Miller, didn't want to create trouble, but he had to investigate. He asked questions to Beatrice, asked if she was there of her own free will. She said yes. Asked if Theodore had forced her into anything. She said no. Asked exactly what the agreement between them was. Beatrice explained, lodging in exchange for witnessing that he had changed. The sheriff scratched his mustache, said that was unusual, very unusual, but technically not illegal if what she said was true. The problem was that the word of a lone woman against the accusation of a respected family didn't weigh much. He recommended they regularize the situation. Marriage would be ideal, or else Beatrice should find another place to live. After the sheriff left, Beatrice and Theodore stood on the porch, not knowing what to do. Marrying was unthinkable. They barely knew each other, didn't have that kind of relationship. And Beatrice leaving to where? She had nowhere to go. And more importantly, she realized with a tightness in her chest she didn't want to go. Not anymore. At night, after the children were asleep, Beatrice did something she hadn't done before. She went into Theodore's room, knocked on the door first. He opened it surprised. She asked if they could talk. He let her in, left the door open out of respect. The room was simple. Single bed, a trunk, a chair. On the walls, nothing. No portrait, no decoration. Like he had erased the past. Beatrice sat on the chair. Theodore stood leaning against the wall. She asked about Eudora. About what had happened. Theodore stayed silent for a long time, then began to speak, said he had met Eudora when she was 17. He was 28. She was the daughter of a merchant in town, talented, pretty, quiet. They had married because it was what one did. It hadn't been love, but it had been respect. In the beginning, then came the frustrations. The ranch didn't prosper as he wanted. There was drought, pests, cattle dying. He started drinking. First, just a little. Then more. Then every day. And when he drank, he got bitter. Didn't beat Eudora, never raised a hand, but the words cut worse than a knife. He said terrible things, blamed her for not having children, though the problem was perhaps his. Yelled when the food wasn't how he wanted, broke things, went out to drink with the hands and came back at dawn stumbling. Eudora shrank, stayed quiet, more and more faded. Theodore saw and did nothing, kept drinking, kept being cruel. Until the day she caught a fever, high fever, violent. Miss Hattie came, did what she could, but it didn't help. In 3 days, Eudora was dead. She was 32 years old. Theodore was drunk when she died. Didn't even see her go. When he woke up the next day and understood what had happened, something broke inside him. He took every bottle in the house and smashed them one by one. Since that day, he never touched alcohol again. But it didn't help. Eudora was dead. And he had killed her, not with his hands, but with years of cruelty. When Theodore finished telling it, he was crying, not sobbing, just tears descending silently down his face. Beatrice got up from the chair, went to him. For the first time since they met, she touched him, held his large, calloused hand between hers, said he had done bad things, but that he wasn't that man anymore, that she saw, that the children saw, that even God must see. Theodore squeezed her hand, asked almost whispering what they were going to do. Beatrice didn't know, but said they would find a way, together. In the following days, Loretta returned to the charge, spoke to Preacher Lawrence. The preacher went to the ranch, talked to Beatrice and Theodore, explained the situation was delicate, that it was creating gossip in town, that if they married, everything would be resolved. If not, Beatrice needed to leave. Beatrice went into her room that night and found a small wooden box on the bed, opened it. Inside was a simple gold ring and a note with Theodore's crooked handwriting. It wasn't a marriage proposal. It was an option. If she wanted to marry to make the world shut its mouth, he would marry. But he didn't expect it to be a real marriage. It would be only on paper, to protect her and the children. If she didn't want to, he would understand. Would find money for her to start over somewhere else. Beatrice held the ring. It was simple, but it was honest, like everything that came from Theodore. She thought about everything she had lived in the last months, thought about how Ralph laughed when Theodore taught him to whistle, thought about how Claire had started calling him Doro, unable to say the whole name. Thought about how she herself had started waking up lighter, sleeping without jumping, feeling something she had forgotten how it felt. Safety. Thought about how, when Theodore smiled rarely at meals, her chest warmed. She left the room. Theodore was on the porch, looking at the starry night. Beatrice stopped beside him, showed the ring, said she accepted, but not because the world demanded it, because she wanted to. Theodore turned to her, eyes wide, asked if she was sure. Beatrice said yes, that he had offered a home in exchange for a second chance, and she was giving the second chance, not out of obligation, by choice. Theodore took her hand slowly, as if picking up something sacred, placed the ring on her finger. It was big, would need adjusting, but it was theirs. It was a new beginning. It was a promise that the past doesn't define the future. They married 2 weeks later in the town church, with only Miss Hattie and Preacher Lawrence as witnesses. Loretta didn't appear, sent a message that this was a farce and she wouldn't give up. But on that day, under the September sun, Beatrice and Theodore didn't think about Loretta. They thought only of the I do, they said, of the ring that was now the right size, of the children running in the churchyard, and of the second chance that, against all odds, had turned into something real. The marriage didn't change much in the routine. Theodore continued sleeping in his room, Beatrice in hers with the children, but something invisible changed. Now, when they sat at the table, it was like a family. When Theodore arrived from work, the children ran to hug him. When Beatrice cooked, she did it thinking of what he liked. And Theodore, who had always been a man of few words, started talking more. Told about the day, about the plans for the ranch, about the dreams he had kept so deep he had forgotten they existed. One night after dinner, while the children played on the living room floor, Theodore asked if Beatrice had been happy with her first husband. She was surprised by the question, thought before answering. Said she had been happy in the way she knew how to be happy back then. Julian was a good man, hard-working, didn't beat her, didn't drink, took care of the children. But it had been a marriage arranged by families. There hadn't been a choice. She had gotten used to him, had built affection, but true love, the kind from books and stories she had never known. Theodore stayed silent, processing, then asked if she thought it really existed, that love from books. Beatrice looked at him, at the face marked by time and regret, at the huge hands holding the coffee mug with care. Said she was starting to believe so, that maybe true love wasn't the kind that arrived ready, perfect, like in fairy tales, but the kind built brick by brick day after day between people who chose to stay despite the imperfections. Theodore held her gaze, asked with a hoarse voice if she was saying what he thought she was saying. Beatrice felt her face heat up but didn't look away. Said she was saying she had started to feel something for him, something that went beyond gratitude, something that made her heart beat different when he walked through the door at the end of the day. Theodore put the mug on the table with a trembling hand, got up, went to her, knelt in front of her chair, held her hands between his, said he felt it too. That since the day he saw her in the square with the children, desperate but dignified, something had lit up inside him. It hadn't been immediate passion. It had been recognition. He had seen in her someone like him, someone hurt, someone trying to survive. And in the months that followed, seeing her care for the children, seeing her stop being afraid of him, seeing her choose to stay, he had fallen in love in a way he had never fallen in love in his life. Beatrice touched his face, ran her thumb over his stubble. Theodore closed his eyes, rested his forehead on her knee. They stayed like that for a long time, in silence, just feeling each other's presence, until Claire appeared asking for water and broke the moment. But something had been said, something had been sealed. That night, after the children slept, Beatrice left her room and went to Theodore's room, knocked lightly. He opened, surprised. She entered, closed the door behind her, didn't say anything, just looked at him, and Theodore understood. They had been husband and wife on paper for weeks, but only now were they ready to be in heart. He pulled her close with care, as if she would break, kissed her slowly, savoring, memorizing. Beatrice melted against him, the months of loneliness and fear finally finding a harbor. And when they lay together, it wasn't just desire. It was surrender. It was trust. It was love built on patience and the brutal honesty of those who didn't hide their own wounds. The following months were the happiest Beatrice had known. The ranch prospered. Theodore worked fewer hours, spent more time with the family, taught Ralph to ride a horse, taught Claire to gather eggs. On cold January nights, the four sat in front of the fireplace, Theodore telling stories, the children laughing, Beatrice sewing. It was a simple life, but it was a full life. But Loretta hadn't forgotten, and she wasn't a woman to give up. In September, a man in a suit appeared at the ranch. He was a lawyer, came from Austin, brought a notice. Loretta was suing Theodore. The accusation was moral negligence regarding the land. She argued that Theodore, having been an alcoholic and abusive husband, lacked the moral standing to keep the lands that had been originally bought with Eudora's family money. She asked that the lands be transferred to her as reparation for her sister's suffering. Theodore read the document with shaking hands. Beatrice read over his shoulder. The hearing would be in October at the county courthouse. He would have to present himself and defend himself. That night Theodore couldn't sleep. Beatrice heard him pacing back and forth in the room. got up, went there, found him sitting on the bed, head in his hands. She sat beside him, put her arm around his broad shoulders. Theodore said he was finished, that Loretta was right, that he didn't deserve those lands, that he had built everything on top of suffering he himself had caused. Beatrice held his face, forced him to look at her, said he had changed, that he wasn't that man anymore, that he did deserve to keep what was his. Theodore shook his head, said the judge wouldn't believe it, that he would look at him and see only the violent drunk who had tormented his wife until she died. Beatrice stayed quiet for a moment, then said she would testify for him, that she would tell everything she had seen, that she would tell the truth. Theodore looked at her with despair, said no, that she didn't need to get involved, that if she testified for him, the whole town would turn against her. Would say she was an accomplice, that she was a gold digger, that she was worse than him. Beatrice smiled, a sad but determined smile, said she didn't care what the town would say, that the only thing that mattered was the truth, and the truth is that Theodore Blackwood had been a bad man who had become a good man, and she would say that to anyone who wanted to hear. The hearing was set for the first week of October. Loretta arrived 3 days early, stayed at the best boarding house in town, spread rumors, said Beatrice was a gold digger who had seduced Theodore to get the ranch, said the children weren't even hers, that she had borrowed them to pretend to be a family mother. Said Theodore continued drinking in secret, that he beat her, that the whole change story was a lie. People believed it. Beatrice felt the stares when she went to town to get supplies, heard the whispers. Once a woman spat on the ground when she passed. Beatrice endured it all silently, held her head high, and kept walking. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. It seemed the whole town had gone to watch. Loretta was seated in the front, dressed in mourning black, handkerchief in hand, expression of a martyr. Her lawyer was a polished man, with glasses, who spoke prettily. The judge was a gentleman of about 60, with a white moustache, known for being strict. Loretta's lawyer began, presented the accusations against Theodore, called witnesses who confirmed Theodore had been an alcoholic, that he had been seen drunk countless times, that he yelled at Eudora, that he had made her suffer, called the old doctor who had attended Eudora and confirmed she lived in a constant state of nerves, called neighbors who had heard arguments, noise of things breaking, crying. Theodore sat in the defendant's chair hearing everything, face pale, eyes down, denied nothing. When his lawyer, a young man who had come from Abilene, asked if he wanted to defend himself, Theodore stood up, said everything that had been said was true, that he had been that man, that he didn't deny it, that he would carry the guilt for the rest of his life, but that 3 years ago he had changed, that he had stopped drinking, that he had tried to be different. Loretta's lawyer attacked, asked how they could believe the word of a drunk, asked what proof existed that he had changed. Theodore stayed silent, had no proof, only had his own word, and the word of a drunk was worth nothing. That was when Beatrice stood up from the chair at the back of the room, asked permission to speak. The judge looked at her, frowning, asked who she was. Beatrice identified herself, wife of Theodore Blackwood. Loretta's lawyer laughed, said a wife wasn't a reliable witness. Of course she would defend her husband. She was interested in the land too. If you're following this story this far, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Stories of resilience and second chances need to be shared. Beatrice didn't let herself be intimidated, said she wasn't interested in lands, that she didn't even know there was a lawsuit when she got married, that she had something else to say. The judge hesitated, then signaled for her to continue. Beatrice went to the front, stood beside Theodore, began to tell her story, how she had been left a widow, desperate, aimless, how Theodore had offered help when no one else had, how she had accepted with fear, expecting to find the monster everyone described, and how she had found a broken man trying to fix himself. She described the months living on the ranch, how Theodore respected her boundaries, how he was patient with the children, how he worked until he dropped from exhaustion as a form of penance, how he had nightmares every night, crying in his sleep, tormented by what he had done, how he never tried to hide the past or pretend he was a saint, how he simply tried every day to be a little better than the day before. Beatrice's voice began to tremble, but she didn't stop. Said Theodore wasn't a perfect man, that he carried deep scars from what he had done, but that he was an honest man, and that honesty was worth more than perfection. That she had chosen to marry him not out of fear, not for interest, but because she had seen who he really was. And who he was someone desperately trying to make peace with his own past. She turned to the judge, said she knew her word alone proved nothing, but asked the judge to consider one thing: if Theodore was still the violent man of the past, if he hadn't really changed, would she be there defending him? She, who was a widow with nothing, who had 2 children to raise, would she risk staying with a dangerous man? Or would she have taken the children and run at the first opportunity? The fact that she was there, voluntarily defending him, knowing everything he had done, wasn't that the greatest proof that something had changed? The silence in the room was absolute. People held their breath. Loretta was pale with rage. The judge looked at Beatrice with a thoughtful expression. Loretta's lawyer tried to attack again, said Beatrice could be manipulated, that battered women often defend their abusers, that the syndrome had a name. Beatrice turned to him, eyes flashing with fury, said she knew very well what it was to be controlled, that her father had been a controlling man his whole life, and that for that very reason she recognized a changed man when she saw one. Theodore didn't control her. Theodore respected her. And there was a huge difference between the two things. Then she did something no one expected, turned to Loretta, looked into the woman's eyes, and said, with a firm voice but not cruel, that she understood her pain, that losing a sister was terrible, that seeing the man who caused so much suffering still alive was unfair, but that keeping him imprisoned in the past, not allowing him to change, didn't bring Eudora back, only perpetuated the suffering. Beatrice said she was sure Eudora, if she could speak, wouldn't want her sister to waste her whole life in revenge, that Eudora, who had been a good woman with a kind heart, would probably prefer to see Theodore changed, helping another family, raising happy children, than to see him destroyed and the land abandoned. Loretta stood up, trembling, shouted that Beatrice had no right to speak in Eudora's name, that she knew nothing. The judge banged the gavel, asking for order. Loretta sat, but tears ran down her face. They weren't tears of anger, they were tears of true pain, of a loss that had never been processed. The judge asked for a recess. Everyone left. Beatrice found Theodore outside. He pulled her into a tight hug, said she didn't need to have done that she had exposed herself, had become a target. Beatrice rested her head on his chest, said she had done it because it was the truth, and because she loved him. It was the first time she said it out loud. Theodore stood paralyzed, then squeezed her tighter, face buried in her hair, and whispered that he loved her too, that she had saved him, that she had given him a reason to want to be better every day. When they returned to the room, the judge was already seated. He read the verdict slowly, said he had pondered greatly, that the crimes of Theodore's past were grave, that Eudora's suffering was real and couldn't be denied, but that the law didn't punish a man for having been an alcoholic if he had stopped, that the law didn't strip property from a man for having been a bad husband if he had changed his life. The judge said Beatrice's testimony had been convincing, that she had nothing to gain by lying, that on the contrary, she had everything to lose defending a man with a destroyed reputation, and that the fact she was there, eyes open, knowing everything and still choosing to stay, spoke louder than any accusation. The judge looked at Theodore, said he would keep the lands, but that it came with a condition, that Theodore would have to make reparation to Eudora's memory, that he would have to plant a grove on the ranch in her honor, and that he would have to contribute to the construction of the new hospital in town in her name. And that if at any moment in the next 5 years there was news that he had returned to drinking or being violent, the case would be reopened. Theodore accepted all conditions. The judge banged the gavel. Case closed. Loretta left the room without looking at anyone. Beatrice saw her go, shoulders slumped, defeated, felt pity, but also felt relief. It was over. On the way back to the ranch, Theodore was quiet, processing. When they arrived, after putting the children to sleep, he took Beatrice's hand and led her outside. The night was beautiful, full of stars. They walked to the place where the old shed used to be, where Theodore kept the bottles before breaking them all. The shed had been demolished. The ground was clean. Theodore said he would plant the grove there, in memory of Eudora, but also in memory of the man he had been and who had died along with her. It would be a memorial, but it would also be a birth. Death and life in the same place. Beatrice held his hand, said it was a beautiful idea, that she would help plant, that they would do it together. And they did. In the following months, Theodore planted 50 oak saplings. Beatrice helped dig, water, care. The children helped too. It became a family project. And when the oaks grew, in future years, they would be living witnesses that people can change. That the past doesn't need to define the future. The ranch prospered. Theodore never touched alcohol again. Beatrice never regretted staying. The children grew up happy, calling Theodore Dad without hesitation. 3 years after the trial, their first biological son was born, a boy they named Lawrence, in honor of the preacher who had given shelter to Beatrice on that desperate first night. Loretta never returned to town. But years later, when she was on her deathbed, she sent a letter to Theodore. It was short, said only that she had thought a lot about what Beatrice had said that day in court, and that maybe she was right, that Eudora probably wouldn't want revenge, would want peace, and that she, Loretta, had finally found peace too. She forgave, and asked forgiveness for having prolonged everyone's suffering. Theodore wept when he read the letter. Kept it together with the only photo he had of Eudora, not to forget but to remember that everyone deserves forgiveness, including himself. Years passed. Ralph grew up, became a man, took over part of the ranch. Claire married a boy from a neighboring town, gave grandchildren to Beatrice and Theodore. Lawrence grew up hearing the story of how his parents met, the story of the unlikely agreement, of the home offered in exchange for a second chance, of trust built brick by brick, of love that was born not of perfection, but of the brutal honesty of two imperfect people choosing to stay. Beatrice grew old beside Theodore. They saw each other's hair turn white, saw the wrinkles multiply, saw the body lose strength, but never lost the daily choice to continue, to start over every day, to forgive and love each other despite and because of the scars. On the afternoon Theodore died, already an old man of 80, Beatrice was holding his hand. He opened his eyes one last time, looked at her and whispered, "Thank you for giving me the second chance." Beatrice squeezed his hand, whispered back, "Thank you for giving me a home, not just of walls, but of heart." Theodore smiled, closed his eyes, and departed in peace. Beatrice lived 5 more years after him. When her time came too, she asked to be buried beside him, under the oak trees they had planted together. The oaks were huge now, shading the ground, singing with the wind. And when they buried her, the whole family was there. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, fruits of the unlikely love between the aimless widow and the man seeking redemption. On the simple tombstone, by decision of the children, was written only this: "Here lie Beatrice and Theodore Blackwood." She gave him a second chance. He gave her a home. Together, they gave each other a new life. And the oaks continued to grow, silent witnesses that transformation is possible, that no one is just the worst day of their life, that second chances, when given with courage and received with humility, can blossom into legacies that span generations. Because in the end, what remains are not the mistakes. It is what we did to fix them. It is who we chose to be after the fall. It is the love built not on perfection, but on the daily persistence of two imperfect souls deciding that together, broken and all, they were whole enough.